In this video, we're going to take a look at how to create a game of Hangman using tkinter in Python, which uses all the words in the English dictionary. Let's get started. First, create a new folder on your computer named Hangman. Then open idle and create a new script. Save it in the new folder and name it hangman.py. Now let's create the tkinter window which our game will be displayed on. First, import tkinter as tk, which imports the library. We're also going to use the random module to pick a random word to base the game of Hangman off, so let's import the random library as well. Let's declare our window by typing window equals tk dot tk open bracket close bracket. Let's set the window config background color. Here I've typed the hex code for a light blue color. Let's set the state of the window to zoomed so that it opens in full screen, and change the window title to Hangman. Let's also declare a few variables to get the current window width and height, and divide the values by 100, so that we can work with 1% of the screen resolution. Finally, let's close the tkinter main loop. This sets up our main window. If we now run the code, we should have a light blue screen. We can now create a new canvas in the window. Canvases can be used to draw shapes onto. In our case, we want to create the image of the Hangman out of lines. Create a canvas with width and height of 500. Set the highlight thickness to 0. This removes any border around the canvas. Let's also set the color to light blue so that it matches our background color. We use the place function to place the canvas within our window. And we refer to the window underscore width and height variables that we created earlier, so to place the canvas at 35% of the screen resolution on the x-axis and 20% down on the y-axis. We can now begin to create our Hangman out of a series of lines. Let's create a new variable for each line. I've set line 1 to 4 to a brown color, as these are the gallows. Line 5 to 10 are white, which is our man. Line 5 uses the create oval function rather than the create line function to create our man's head. If we now run the code, we can see our lines have been drawn to the canvas window within our screen. Let's now create a list which will contain all the words which we use for our Hangman game. Eventually we will use the entire dictionary, but for now, let's type out 3 words which we can use in testing our code in a variable called words. We want our words to be displayed underneath the image of the Hangman. Let's create a new canvas in which we can use to place underscores for each of the letters required in our words. We can set the background of the new canvas to light blue, but I'm just changing it to white temporarily so that we can see where it is placed on the screen. Here you can see that we have a new canvas that is the width of the current screen and 50 pixels high. I'm just changing it back to light blue so that the canvas blends in with the background color. Now let's create the main keyboard buttons for our screen. For the game of Hangman, we need to guess what the word is by selecting a letter. We can create 26 buttons to do this. The easiest way to create 26 buttons at once is to use a 2-dimensional array. So let's create one now. The 2D array I'm creating has 4 rows and a variable number of columns. The first 3 rows have 7 columns and the last row has 5 columns, containing all the letters of the alphabet. We can place the buttons based on the array by using a for loop. We will need to change the x and y positions of where we want the buttons placed for each loop. So let's define 2 variables. One called xPlace and one called yPlace. We can now use a nested for loop. As our array has 4 rows, we can set the range of the first loop to 4, The number of columns is variable dependent on the row, so let's count how many columns there are for each row using the len function, then pass the count into our second for loops range. We can now create a tkinter button on each loop. The button name is based on the current loop's X and Y values. Let's set the button color to light blue and the text to white. We need to pass through the current loop's X and Y values to a function. Let's call the function current_letter. We can now place the buttons based on the X and Y place variables values. Each time the loops run, we need to change the place X and Y values. The X-axis needs updating every loop, and then resetting for the start of a new row. The Y-axis only needs updating every row. We can now create the function for check_letter, which gets past the current row and column X and Y values. Let's write a pass statement for now so that we can test the code. When we run the code, we should now have 26 clickable buttons containing all the letters of the alphabet on our screen. They won't do anything yet. We first need to get Python to choose a random word from the words variable that we created earlier. First, let's create a few new variables called labels and label 12, then create a new function called set_word, which will control how the word is created. In our function, let's declare a few global variables. We will need a word size variable to determine the length of our words, so let's create this here also. If we use the random choice method from the random library, we will get a random word chosen from our words variable. We need to get the size of that word by using the len function. We need to set the position of each letter in the word as well, so let's create a variable called position, and a for loop to loop through every letter in the word. The location that the word is placed at is based on the current word size, as well as the screen X resolution. We can now create an underscore on our canvas for each letter in the word based on the letter's position, as defined in X_location. Then we can do the same, but instead of an underscore, create a label above the underscore using the same X_location variable. The text of this label will be a question mark, as we need to guess what the letter is. We need to increase the value of our position variable so that each letter is placed 100 pixels away from the last each time the loop runs. We want this function to run whenever the script launches. So at the bottom of the code, call the function by typing set_word open bracket close bracket. Now when we run the code, our underscores and question marks will be shown on the screen. If we run the script a few times, we can see that the word length changes. As the word is being picked at random from our words variable and drawn on the screen dynamically in our for loops based on how many letters are in the word. We now need to create a function that defines when the man is displayed on the screen. We don't want the game to start by displaying the man. Let's first create a variable named current_count, which will count how many lines of the man need to be drawn to the screen. And let's create a createMan function and refer to the lines variables 5 to 10, which currently draw our man, as well as the newly created variable. Whenever this code runs, we want to delete the previous drawn man, so let's use the destroy function to remove him from the screen. We only want to place the man a line at a time, so let's copy and paste the line variables into the function and draw them based on how many lines are set in our current count variable. With each increase in the variable current count, the man will have another line drawn to the screen. We also want to call this function when the script runs, so scroll down to the bottom of the script and call the function. Now when we run the code, our man should not be displayed, as the current count is set to 0. If we go back to the check_letter function that we created earlier and create a variable above it named in_word that we can use to check whether the letter pressed is in the word. Now let's remove the pass statement and declare a few global variables that will be used inside the function. If the current count of lines is above or equals to 6, it means that we have lost the game, as our man will be fully drawn, so we can use the return method as we no longer need to check letters. Otherwise, for each letter in the word, we need to check whether the button's pressed letter equals our current word letter. We convert it to uppercase so that we don't have to worry about it being case sensitive. If our selection is in the word, we want to turn the button color to a dark gray and set in word to 0. Otherwise, we want to set the button color to red. Then for each letter in the word, if the letter matches the current letter, we want to set the text of that letter, which currently has the value of a question mark, to the actual letter so that the letter is revealed every time we get one right. If the letter is not in the word, we also want to increase the value of current count, which will then draw another line to the screen to reveal the man. Let's sort the indents out so that the code runs in the correct order. Then reset the value of in_word to 1 and call the createMan function. This will redraw the man based on the current count variable. If we now run the code, we can see that if an incorrect letter button is pressed, another line of the man is drawn. If we restart and press a few of the correct letters, the letters are revealed above the underscores. When we have lost, we will no longer be able to press any more buttons due to the return call, which checks whether 6 lines have been drawn based on the current count variable. We now need to create a label that displays when either the player wins, by guessing all the letters in the word, or loses by getting 6 pieces of the man drawn onto the screen. Let's call this label winner label, and give it a background color of light blue. Let's also create a few labels that will display the current score, for instance how many wins and loses the player currently has. Let's call these win label and loss label. Let's also create a few variables to store the value of our wins and losses. We can call these won score and lost score. Let's also create a variable called winner, which can be used to track if a player has won or lost, and give it an empty string value for now. And let's just run the code to make sure that there are no errors or display issues with these newly created labels and variables. It all looks good so far. We can now create a function which will be used to check whether the player has won or lost. Here we can declare a few global variables and create a variable called current letters, which equals 0. Now, we know that if the current count is above or equals to 6, that we have lost, as the current count is the count of lines drawn on the screen, 6 lines being a full man. So, we can write an if statement that sets the winner to 0 if current count equals 6. Now, for each letter in the word, we want to count how many values are not equal to a question mark. We know that if there are question marks left, then the game hasn't been won. And we know that if the number of characters that aren't question marks equals the number of letters in our word, then the game has been won, so we can set the value of winner to 1. Now, if winner does equals 1, we want to set the winner label to display the message that the user has won. We also want to add 1 to the win score, and then display the score on the screen along with a message. When the winner equals 0, then we want to do the opposite and display a lost message to the screen, as well as add a value of 1 to the loss score, and update the loss score label with the current value of losers. We also then want to show what the word was if the player loses, by looping through any remaining letters that currently have a question mark in them, and displaying the letter value for that space. We can also make the font color red to highlight which letters the player didn't get correct. Back in our check letter function, we don't need to check the letter if the winner variable equals 1 already, so let's declare the variable global winner, check if it equals 1, and if it does, return to break out of the function. Let's just test the code. Within the createMan function, call the checkWinner function. Now if we run the code again and test it, we can see that the winner labels and score labels are correctly brought back when we win or lose. Our game's code is working as intended. Let's now create a function to reset the game so that we don't have to keep closing and reopening it each time we want to play again. At the bottom of the script, we can create a retry button which calls the function retryfunc. Let's just create the retry function and put a pass statement in it, so that we can test that the button works. When we now run the code, we should see a button that says try again. Let's now code out the function. When the button is pressed, we want to reset most of the values in our code, apart from the current score function, as we want to keep adding to the winning and losing score each round. Let's first declare all the global variables that we want to update from within the function. We want to reset the value of winner to its default state, and set current count to 0. We also want to run a nested for loop, to reset all of our alphabet buttons colors. Then we want to destroy all the labels on the screen so that their values are removed, and reset them to an empty value. We also need to remove the underscores from the screen and reset a few more variables. Then we want to call the setWord and the createMan functions again, as this will generate a new random word and reset the status of the man. If we now run the code and complete a word, then press the try again button, the game should reset, but the score will keep getting added to on the right-hand side. If we want to completely reset the game and reset the scores, then we will need to create a new function, let's create a button called the clear button, which calls a function called clearfunc. Above it, we can then create a function called clearfunc. Here let's call some global variables again. Then we can set the values of win and loss labels to empty, and set the value of won score to 0. And lost score to 0. Now if we run the code, then play a few rounds, then if we press the clear button, the scores should reset. We can also then press try again to completely reset the game. As the score is now set to 0, when we win or lose, it should only show as a 1, so our code is working so far. The only remaining thing that we need to do is create a full list of words for us to guess between. We can do this by downloading words from the English dictionary and saving them in a notepad file, which can be called as part of the script. To do this, first, go to your internet browser. Here I'm using a website called Milestronks, but there are many websites to get a list of English words on this site. There is an all capital letters version. If we click on this, it will bring back a list of all words in the dictionary in capital letter form. We can now copy and paste these into a notepad file and save them in our Hangman folder. Then, if we go back to our script, and comment out the current words variable. Then create a new list called words. And open the file. We can then, for each line in the file, append the word, with any extra character spacing removed by using the rstrip function, to our words list. Now when we run the code, our words list will have every word in the English dictionary. So our game of Hangman will contain lots of different options for words to guess. We now have a fully functional game of Hangman. Like with all the projects we have created so far, there are a number of ways to improve upon this code. We could add a live system that starts off with 3 lives, so that if we reach 6 lines on the man, we can use a life to get another go at guessing a letter, then for each game we win, we get another life. We could also have a button that removes words that we don't like from our text file whenever we press it. We could also filter the words in our dictionary a bit more using code, so that only words of a certain length are available. There are many options to improve upon this game. But hopefully you now have your own working game of Hangman in Python. If this video helped, then leave a like or subscribe, or comment below with any questions you have. See you in the next one.